1949, and the Cold War is getting underway. Troops trained to defend Western Europe, and the United States joins its allies to set up NATO. In China, the communists achieve their greatest victory as Mao Zedong becomes ruler of a quarter of the world's population. British troops reinforce Hong Kong, and the frigate HMS Amethyst makes a daring escape from communist forces. In London, the year opens cold, and with the city still gripped by post-war austerity. Smog shrouds the streets, and although there is a hint of better things to come when clothes rationing is abolished, the country is stunned when the pound is devalued, sending basic food prices up. There is turmoil in the financial markets, and the government exhorts British firms to take advantage of devaluation by launching a massive export drive. One unlikely figure who listened to the government's exhortations was a 69-year-old widow, Olivia Durand Deacon. She had been left wealthy by her husband, who had been colonel of the Gloucestershire Regiment, and had been living comfortably at the Onslow Court Hotel in Kensington's elegant Queensgate for many years. Mrs. Durand Deacon had had the idea to produce artificial fingernails from plastic and was looking for someone to help her exploit it. One of the hotel's other permanent guests seemed just the man, a dapper and friendly 39-year-old businessman named John Haigh. Always cheerful and well-dressed, Haigh drove a smart Alvis motorcar. He told people at the hotel that he was the owner of a prosperous small factory in Crawley, about 50 miles south of London. When Mrs. Durand Deacon approached John Haigh about her idea, he was extremely interested. He told the entrepreneurial widow that he would look into the type of material which would be needed for the fingernails and find out whether the necessary equipment could be accommodated at his factory. Haigh consulted his diary, and they agreed to go down there on the 18th of February to discuss the project. Haigh arranged to meet Mrs. Durand Deacon outside the Army and Navy department store and drive her down to Crawley in his Alvis, but he later claimed that she failed to turn up. Nevertheless, Haigh drove down to Crawley that day. He had been a regular visitor for several years and was known in the town. At about 4 o'clock, he was seen at the George Hotel in the centre of the town, having tea with a lady of a very similar appearance to Mrs. Durand Deacon. 2.5 hours later, he popped into a nearby cafe, the Old Ancient Priors, for an egg on toast and a chat with Mr. Outram, the proprietor. Later, at around 9:30 in the evening, he went back to the George for dinner. After enjoying a hearty meal, he drove back to London. The next morning, Mrs. Durand Deacon was not at her usual table for breakfast. Expressing surprise, John Haigh asked another guest, Mrs. Constance Lane, who was rather less enamoured with him than some, if she had seen Mrs. Durand Deacon. To his consternation, she knew all about their appointment, and he hastily explained that Mrs. Durand Deacon had failed to meet him as arranged. Later that day, Haigh drove back down to Crawley. While there, he visited his premises and sold some jewellery for £110. He also left a Persian lamb coat for cleaning and called in at the George for a meal. As usual, he was quite open about his presence in the town. Meanwhile, Mrs. Lane had checked her friend's room and found that it had not been slept in. When the next morning Haigh asked her if she had any news, she announced that she was going to the police. This took Haigh somewhat aback, but he recovered sufficiently to offer to drive her to the station in his Alvis. At first, the police didn't take the disappearance very seriously, but a sharp-eared agency reporter phoned the story to an evening paper, and soon it was being widely reported, and a search was mounted by Scotland Yard. Haigh's first interview seemed unsuspicious, as he explained that Mrs. Durand Deacon had failed to turn up at their rendezvous. Back at the hotel, he confirmed his story in a lengthy statement. But routinely following up his story of the trip to Crawley, police were surprised to discover that far from owning a factory down there, he only did some business there, and occasionally used a small storeroom. The police decided to question John Haigh again. He was interviewed a third time by a policewoman, Sergeant Alexandra Lambourne, who took an instant dislike to the little man. He seemed too eager to please. Nonetheless, he repeated his story without any apparent inconsistencies. Back at the station, she wrote a report saying that she felt uneasy about him, and suggesting that his background should be investigated. Haigh complained to the press about police harassment. However, it turned out that Sergeant Lambourne was right to be suspicious. He had a long record as an accomplished conman, and had in fact been in prison 3 times for fraud, forgery, theft, and false pretenses. With what appeared to be a promising lead, the local police at Crawley were asked to check Haigh's story again, and they went back to the head of the factory with which Haigh had done some business. It was then that he suggested that they might like to look in the storeroom that Haigh used. On the 26th of February, 2 detectives accompanied him to the small yard in which it stood. The yard still exists today, close to the centre of Crawley. The only set of keys had been lent to Haigh, so the detectives prized open the door. At first the interior seemed quite ordinary, with various tools and tins, bottles and rags. But then some more unusual items started to turn up, such as a pair of heavy rubber gloves and a rubber apron stained with chemicals. There was also a wartime gas mask, some empty acid containers, and some corroded metal drums. When they found a revolver, the detectives knew they were onto something, and this was confirmed when they found a number of personal possessions, including jewellery and a handbag containing a cleaning ticket. The next day it was discovered that this was for a Persian lamb coat, which had belonged to Mrs. Durand Deacon. Immediately, the police went back to the Onslow Court Hotel and were waiting for Haigh when he drove up in his Alvis. He was brought in for further questioning and seemed quite unconcerned, dozing off while waiting to be interviewed. When Detective Inspector Shelley Symes asked him where Mrs. Durand Deacon was, and then revealed that the police had found her jewellery and coat, he only seemed to hesitate briefly. Then Haigh launched into an extraordinary story, admitting that he had taken her belongings. The detectives warned him, but he went on. Mrs. Durand Deacon no longer exists. She has disappeared completely, and no trace of her can ever be found again. I have destroyed her with acid. You will find the sludge that remains at Leopold Road. Every trace of her body is gone. With no trace of emotion, Haigh described how he had shot her and then put her body into a vat of acid to dissolve away. As he spoke with pride of the way in which he had planned and carried out the murder, it became apparent that Haigh was confident that without the body, the police would never be able to convict him. Throughout all his interviews, Haigh was to show no remorse or concern for his victims. On the 2nd of March, Haigh was taken to Horsham Magistrates' Court and accused of Mrs. Durand Deacon's murder. Angry crowds attempted to attack him as he left after a 2-minute hearing. Haigh's confidence that the police would never find a trace of the widow's body was soon rudely shattered by the forensic skill of Dr. Keith Simpson. Starting inside the storeroom, he found bloodstains which matched Mrs. Durand Deacon's blood group. Then he turned his attention to the weed-covered yard and found the spot where Haigh had emptied the sludge. Soon he picked out a stone about the size of a cherry. It was the first of 3 human gallstones. Covered in fat, these would have taken weeks to disappear completely. Vastly encouraged by this first evidence of a human body, Dr. Simpson and his team continued their meticulous search of the yard. The press followed every development as news of the remains began to emerge. Public interest was intense, and crowds flocked to peer into the little yard as detectives continued their work. Every inch of its area was examined. Not all the reports which appeared in the press were strictly accurate. The search lasted for more than a week, and soon questions were being asked about the real total of this macabre killer. Everything in the storeroom was taken away, together with boxes of sludge-soaked earth and the corroded drums. The crucial discovery was a set of false teeth which had not decomposed. They belonged to Mrs. Durand Deacon. As the evidence against him piled up, the police were finding out more of Haigh's background. He was born in 1909 to parents who were strict members of the fundamentalist Christian sect, the Plymouth Brethren. All entertainment and sport were banned, and the boy repeatedly threatened with hellfire. As he grew up, he reacted against this strict upbringing and developed into a smooth and charming conman. He became an expert forger and committed many frauds, sometimes impersonating a lawyer. In 1934, Haigh got married, apparently as much as a means of escaping some of his victims as for any love for Beatrice Hamer, a former photographic model and waitress. Less than 4 months later, he was sentenced to 15 months in prison for fraud and never saw his wife again. Shortly after his release, Haigh started working for William McSwan, running an amusement arcade. They split up when Haigh had to go on the run again, but years later, in 1944, when Haigh had moved to wartime London, they met up by chance. McSwan's mother asked Haigh to help her son evade military call-up. Haigh had long been fascinated by the idea of committing the perfect murder, so he agreed. On the pretext of arranging a hiding place, he took McSwan to a basement flat opposite Gloucester Road Tube, where he bludgeoned him to death. After allegedly drinking some of his victim's blood, Haigh disposed of the body in a vat of acid and put the remains into a drain. This was Haigh's first experiment with using acid to destroy a body, and he soon used the same method to kill McSwan's mother and father. Having got rid of the McSwans, Haigh used his skill as a forger to get control of their money and other property. Amazingly, none of his letters aroused any suspicion, and so successful had Haigh been in disposing of the bodies that it was only when he admitted to these murders during questioning that the police found out about the appalling crimes which had been committed in the Gloucester Road basement. He was now convinced that he had found the way to commit the perfect murder. When his cash ran out, Haigh looked around for further victims. He picked on a wealthy doctor, Archibald Henderson, and his attractive wife Rosalie, whom he met when they were trying to sell a house. Haigh spent several months becoming firm friends with the couple before he was ready to act. By February 1948, he had found another slaughterhouse, and the Hendersons agreed to go for a weekend to Brighton with their devoted friend, Johnny Haigh. And while there, Dr. Henderson agreed to visit Crawley to see Haigh's factory. He was shot, and Haigh then lured his wife to the storeroom, killed her, and disposed of both bodies in the acid. Once again, he claimed to have drunk his victims' blood before disposing of them. He then forged a series of letters to get control of their property under the pretext that they had gone to South Africa, leaving him as their trustee. Such was his skill that neither their friends nor the banks ever suspected anything, and attempts were still being made to trace the Hendersons in South Africa a year later. Within a year, this money was running out, and Johnny Haigh had picked on his last victim, Mrs. Durand Deacon. Another container of acid was ordered. The news that Haigh had confessed to 4 more murders created a sensation. As the police searched the cellar at Gloucester Road and followed other information which Haigh seemed happy to give them, they found it hard to accept that in each case he claimed to have drunk the blood of his victims. All police efforts to prevent this information leaking out to the press failed. And the news inevitably proved a sensation when Haigh appeared again at Horsham Magistrates' Court to be remanded for trial. People found it hard to believe that the dapper little man who had confessed so willingly to the police was a vampire. Sightseers of all ages struggled for a glimpse. The vampire story, which had so horrified and fascinated the public, had already got one newspaper into trouble. The editor of the Daily Mirror, Sylvester Bolam, insisted on publishing the news that a man had been arrested for these crimes in the same issue as the announcement of Haigh's arrest. This was reckoned to be in contempt of court, since under English law nothing prejudicial to an accused man can be published before his trial, and Bolam was jailed for 3 months and his newspaper fined. He was released only a short time before Haigh went for trial on the 18th of July at Lewes Assizes. As always, Haigh was immaculately dressed and seemed totally unconcerned as he was led into court. The prosecution was led by the Attorney General, Sir Hartley Shawcross. He immediately set out the full details of Haigh's macabre confessions during cross-examination of Detective Inspector Shelley Symes. Symes emphasized Haigh's belief that without a body, murder could not be proved. Dr. Keith Simpson was then called to tell the jury that he had been able to find incontrovertible evidence of the killing of Mrs. Durand Deacon during his examination of the storeroom and the yard outside. Step by step, the jury was told how the unsuspecting widow had been lured to the storeroom and shot. How Haigh had made meticulous preparations for disposing of her body with acid, and how he had carried this out over several days. They heard how he had shown absolutely no remorse and seemed proud of his craftsmanship. Throughout the prosecution case, Haigh sat doing crossword puzzles and showing little interest. At no point did his defending counsel, Maxwell Fyfe, attempt to cross-examine any prosecution witness. He had decided that Haigh's only hope of avoiding the gallows was to be proved insane. When he opened the defense case, he immediately stated, "The disorder of mind which I submit has affected the reason of the accused is that rare but quite well-known type of mental aberration which is called, in psychological medicine, pure paranoia." A leading consultant, Dr. Henry Yellowlees, was called to testify to Haigh's paranoia. He proved unconvincing, several times rattled by questions from the judge. Maxwell Fyfe was unable to repair the bad impression made by his only defense witness. In cross-examination, Hartley Shawcross forced Yellowlees to admit that Haigh must have known he was doing wrong. The judge's summing up was scrupulous in setting out the defense's theory of paranoia, but the jury was unimpressed. On the 19th of July, they took only 13 minutes to find Haigh guilty. He was sentenced to hang for the murder of Mrs. Durand Deacon. In the days before his execution, he again made headlines by asking for a rehearsal so that there should be no problems with his hanging. The request was refused, but at 9 o'clock on the morning of the 10th of August, Haigh was executed without any difficulties. A crowd of several hundred waited outside the gates of Wandsworth Prison to see the official notice of death. Meticulous to the last, Haigh donated his favourite suit and tie to Madame Tussauds, so that his effigy should be as dapper as he always had been in life. It is still on display there today, as a reminder of one of the most cold-blooded and remorseless of British murderers, who was trapped by his own overconfidence and the forensic skill of Scotland Yard.